They were born in silence, during a night soaked in fear, as hounds circled above, and the walls whispered secrets no man was ever meant to hear. Cedar Mills, Ohio, 1856. A forgotten town so remote, it barely left a shadow on the map. And yet beneath its plain, frost-covered soil, something impossible was born. Something science refuses to classify, and history refuses to remember. 3 boys entered the world that night, not crying, not screaming, just watching, as if they already knew what was coming, as if they had been waiting. Their mother, Ruth, didn't scream either. She barely breathed. She whispered to them in a language no midwife could recognize, a liquid tongue that flowed like river water through the cracked stone basement of a Quaker meeting house, Station 14 of the Underground Railroad. Above them, slave catchers and bloodhounds searched with boots and axes. Below them, the 3 boys emerged into a world already hunting them. From their first breath, they were aware. What followed was a series of events so deeply unnatural, so fundamentally incompatible with everything we know about birth, cognition, and human development, that the few surviving records were buried in attics, locked in private family Bibles, and never published in any official journal. Because if they had been, the world would have asked questions the powers of that time couldn't afford to answer. You see, these triplets didn't just survive the night. They didn't just grow up. They began to see. At first, the adults thought it was coincidence. 3 boys turning their heads in unison toward an empty window, only for a stranger to appear there moments later. Babies crying in sync when someone lied. Infants flinching when a fugitive entered the room under false pretenses. But then it deepened. By age 1, they could sense concealed violence. By age 2, they reacted to murderers before the bodies were found. By age 3, they spoke to each other in that same river tongue their mother used as she bled out on the straw, warning the midwife with her final breath. They'll always know. They're not like other children, and they weren't. They aren't. Because descendants of these boys still exist, and those closest to them say the gift, or the curse, never faded. Tonight we begin a descent into a story most would burn before reading aloud. But you're still here. So lean in and listen very carefully. History, if written by the victors, has always been a weapon. But what happens when history doesn't just omit a detail? It buries an entire bloodline. The Quakers of Cedar Mills made a choice, a dangerous, unsanctioned choice. Rather than hand the infants over to authorities or orphanages, they raised them in secret. The entire town became surrogate parent. The records were falsified. The names, Caleb, Ezra, and Isaac, were given not for tradition, but protection. Because even then, the adults could feel it. These children weren't merely gifted. They were attuned to something far older, far more primal. By the time they could walk, the triplets had become the town's silent barometers of truth. A glance from them could fracture a lie. A look could freeze a man mid-sentence. And if they whispered to one another in that alien cadence, smooth, watery, almost ancient, people stopped what they were doing and listened. They didn't understand the words, but they understood the weight. Then came the merchant, Thompson. He smiled too much, talked too freely, claimed he was en route to Columbus, carrying nothing but spices and bolts of cloth. The triplets screamed the moment he entered the meeting house. They clawed at the floor, eyes wild with something that looked a lot like terror. Days later, they slept peacefully again, just as news arrived. Thompson had been arrested in Lancaster for murdering his partner. The corpse had been hidden in the same wagon he brought to Cedar Mills. After that, the Quakers stopped doubting. Dr. William Harrison, the village's sole physician, documented what he could, secretly. His notes described the boy's physiology as entirely human, but neurologically impossible. He observed reflexes faster than measurable, an apparent ability to detect emotional states in strangers with near-perfect accuracy, and a strange synchronization between the three that defied every study of developmental independence. But the medical world never saw those notes, because Dr. Harrison knew what would happen if they did. He once wrote, If the state or the clergy ever see what I've written, these boys will vanish, and the world will call it science. This isn't folklore. This is documented, hidden, and still whispered about by descendants of Cedar Mills residents to this day. The Garrett brothers, those infamous bounty hunters, returned one final time in 1859. But this time, something else awaited them in the meeting house. And that's where things truly begin to unravel.
The final encounter between the Garrett brothers and the boys is where local lore turns into something darker, something unrecorded, something deliberately unspoken. By 1859, the triplets were 3 years old, but they didn't act like it. Language came early, not just speech, but comprehension, not just hearing, but knowing. They would often answer questions not yet asked, finish sentences left unspoken, and on more than one occasion, refer to things that hadn't happened yet, but would, within days. The Quakers called it the knowing. Outsiders called it something else, blasphemy. Word had spread quietly of the 3 boys born under blood and silence. It reached a Confederate sympathizer in Portsmouth who offered a bounty to the Garrett brothers, $400 to bring the boys south. Alive, but silenced. What happened next comes only from fragments, an unsigned letter recovered from a cedar chest in 1978, and the oral recollections of a dying Quaker descendant who never allowed her name to be recorded. The Garretts arrived at night, again. But this time they didn't knock. They broke in, and what they found wasn't what they expected. The meeting house was empty, silent, no candles, no fire, just the cold breath of winter and the creak of pine boards under leather boots. But the boys were waiting. According to the letter, the 3 children stood at the far end of the basement, unflinching, eyes fixed on the trapdoor. They were calm, silent, as if expecting the brothers. And when the trapdoor was flung open, when the hunters descended with rope and iron shackles, something happened. The first Garrett brother, Thomas, reportedly dropped dead before reaching the floor, his face twisted in what the letter called a mirror of his own sin. The second brother, Elias, dropped his lantern, babbling incoherently, bleeding from the ears, retreating upstairs screaming, "They showed me! They showed me!" The third man, unnamed, was never seen again. The letter ends with one final line. They weren't defending themselves. They were revealing. And I believe no man can survive the full weight of what they see. This was no longer a tale of gifted children. This was the emergence of something ancient in human form. And still, we're only just beginning. What happened in the basement of the Cedar Mills meeting house on that winter night was not a miracle. It was not science, and it was not the work of children. It was revelation, delivered by something wearing the face of innocence, but carrying the mind of something far older. After the Garrett incident, the triplets were never spoken of publicly again. Not by the Quakers, not by the Underground Railroad, not even by those who had once cared for them daily. In fact, a strange silence settled over Cedar Mills itself, as if the town had collectively agreed to forget. Records vanished, birth logs torn from ledgers, Dr. Harrison's notes removed from his journals, a whole chapter of American history simply erased. But the boys didn't disappear. They were moved, quietly, taken from family to family, always within a trusted circle. No names, no questions, no church baptisms. They were ghosts raised among shadows. By the time they were 7, something new had begun to emerge, a form of resonance. The triplets didn't just know lies or sense violence. They could now amplify emotions around them. When they were together, those nearby reported strange side effects, intense dreams, sudden nausea, euphoric visions, or the sharp onset of guilt. And not just any guilt, targeted guilt. Men confessed things they had hidden for decades, Women broke down sobbing over thoughts they'd never voiced aloud. A man named Fletcher, a former slave catcher turned blacksmith, was found kneeling outside the boys' home, crying and muttering the names of the people he'd sold into bondage. He hung himself 3 days later. No suicide note, just a burned symbol drawn into the barn wall, the same symbol Ruth had traced into the dirt floor of the basement just before her death. 3 concentric circles, interlocked, endless. The symbol has since surfaced in scattered places, carved into stone near ancient Native American burial sites, etched onto a 1000-year-old Norse tablet recovered in Greenland, and drawn in the margins of an 18th century French grimoire long banned by the church. You see, the boys didn't just carry strange gifts, they carried a legacy, one not born of genetics, but of some ancient continuity, something older than memory. And the deeper you look, the clearer it becomes. This wasn't the first time something like them had walked among us. But maybe, just maybe, it was the first time they were allowed to grow. And that should terrify you. There's a reason you've never heard of the Cedar Mills triplets in school books or state archives. Because by 1870, every official trace of their existence had been scrubbed, intentionally, methodically, and with institutional precision. But who ordered that silence? It wasn't just frightened townspeople or cautious Quakers. It came from higher, far higher. Surviving fragments of Quaker correspondence refer to interested visitors arriving from Washington. Men dressed not as clergy or scholars, but as federal officials, though no record exists of any sanctioned investigation into Cedar Mills during that time. These men didn't ask questions. They gave instructions. The triplets were to be separated. Caleb was taken to Pennsylvania, raised on a secluded estate owned by a scientific society with no name. Ezra disappeared into the Appalachian interior with a group known only in coded letters as the Root Keepers. And Isaac, the most silent of the 3, was rumored to have been placed within a military orphanage in Virginia, his trail ending with a single chilling note. Subject exhibits precognitive behavioral patterns. Maintain extreme caution. But what truly exposes the depth of this manipulation is what happened next. In 1873, a medical journal based in Boston published a short abstract under a pseudonym. The paper detailed a trio of children born in the free North, exhibiting synchronized autonomic responses, emotionally triggered seizures in caregivers, and spontaneous linguistic anomalies unrooted in European, African, or Native American dialects. The journal was shut down 2 months later. No warning, no public notice, just silence. You need to understand something. Institutions don't erase accidents. They erase threats. And what these boys represented wasn't just a mystery. They were a danger to everything the state, the church, and the emerging fields of science had been built upon. Why? Because they shattered the illusion of control. They proved that human perception might not be the top of the pyramid, that something deeper, older, and more conscious could be waiting beneath it. Watching, whispering through certain bloodlines, and in the rarest of cases, being born again. Now here's where you come in. If you've made it this far, then you're not here for stories. You're here for truths. So I want you to lock this transformation in. Drop this phrase in the comments twice. Once for each eye opened. The silence watches. The silence watches. This isn't just engagement. It's identification. Let the others scroll past. We're going deeper. There's a pattern that only becomes visible when you stop trusting the surface. When you question the stories you were handed by textbooks, pulpits, and institutions that claim to serve, but exist to suppress. Because this isn't just about 3 strange boys in 1856. It's about the systems that knew what they were and acted swiftly to ensure you never would. Let me ask you this. Have you ever wondered why certain psychological conditions are quietly renamed, reclassified, or buried entirely? Why terms like second sight, twin telepathy, or collective cognition have been stripped from scientific vocabulary and replaced with clinical jargon that sanitizes what they truly mean. It's not coincidence, it's containment. After the triplets were separated, strange phenomena began appearing across different regions of the United States, always quietly, always just beneath the threshold of public notice. In 1881, a remote Pennsylvania boarding school was shut down after multiple students reported hearing the thoughts of a boy who never spoke. In 1893, miners in Appalachia fled a coal camp after waking night after night to find a small child standing outside their cabins, staring silently until sunrise. The reports were dismissed as hysteria, but in private journals, familiar words reappear. He knew. He looked straight through me. He spoke in a language like rushing water. These weren't isolated events. They were echoes, fragments of whatever force had been born in cedar mills now breaking through elsewhere, unfiltered, uncontrolled, unstudied. And the institutions scrambled to keep up. This is where the psychiatric hospitals come in. Between 1880 and 1920, over 340 new asylums were constructed across the U.S., many in remote areas with little oversight, many tied to federal funding through obscure health initiatives. The official reason? A mental health crisis. The real reason? Containment of anomalous children. The triplets had become a blueprint, a classified template for identifying and isolating others like them. And the language used in their files, those that survive, is chilling. Subjects exhibit anticipatory awareness. Subjects capable of emotional redirection. Subjects must not be housed together under any circumstance. You weren't taught this in school. You were taught that the unknown was myth, that perception had limits, that consciousness lived inside a skull and nowhere else. But the triplets proved otherwise, and those who witnessed it firsthand spent their remaining years either haunted or silenced. So ask yourself, what kind of world do you really live in if the truth must be hidden to survive? By the early 1900s, the descendants of those who had once protected the Cedar Mills triplets had either vanished into obscurity or been absorbed into the same institutions they once feared. But the bloodline? It didn't vanish. It went to ground. We now enter territory too fragmented for conventional historians and too disturbing for mainstream academia. But in the basements of Masonic lodges, in the archives of long-disbanded abolitionist churches, in the personal papers of midwives and field surgeons, you find clues. Hints that the blood of Ruth's sons didn't die with them. It spread. In 1914, just as World War I ignited, a military outpost in Kansas reported an incident involving twin recruits from Ohio. The twins were known for uncanny timing, often moving or speaking in perfect unison. They passed all psychological and physical exams, except for one detail. They both failed the lie detection test. Not because they were lying, because the machine broke. Repeatedly. On both. An officer's handwritten memo, uncovered in 1997 from a private war museum, read, "Subjects exhibit emotional bleed. One reacts when the other is injured. One weeps when the other lies. If this is hereditary, the implications are unacceptable." The twins were transferred to a facility in upstate New York. After that, there's no record of them ever existing. Not even graves. But it doesn't stop there. Throughout the 20th century, reports surface, always muffled, always dismissed. Children in remote orphanages speaking languages no one taught them. Siblings completing each other's sentences before they could write. A 1948 case of triplet girls adopted separately in Virginia, who found each other years later and could describe the interiors of one another's childhood homes in perfect detail, despite never having met. And always beneath the reports, the symbol. 3 concentric circles, interlocked, hidden in carved door frames, etched into cribs, drawn under mattresses. It's not folklore, it's coding. Because here's the hidden truth. The institutions didn't just want to silence these bloodlines. They wanted to track them, exploit them, turn ancient awareness into weapons of war, into tools of manipulation. And they failed. Because the deeper truth is this: The triplets were never just anomalies. They were reminders, living proof that there is a thread beneath history, unbroken, forbidden, and awake. And if you've been feeling something stirring inside you as you listen to this, you might carry part of that thread. The story could have ended there, buried under classified files, drowned in psychiatric diagnoses, or dismissed as rural superstition. But it didn't, because something survived, something that didn't want to remain hidden. In 1956, exactly 100 years after the triplets' birth, a man named Dr. Elias Monroe, a cognitive researcher at Cornell, began receiving anonymous packages. Inside, journals, sketches, medical records, and photographs. Most were dated, yellowed with age. But one Polaroid was fresh. 3 children, unmistakably identical, standing in the snow in front of a black church with no name. The children weren't labeled, but the envelope they came in had one phrase written in graphite. They've returned. Stop the research. Dr. Monroe never spoke publicly about the materials, but his private notes, uncovered decades later by a grad student cataloging Cornell's sealed archives, tell a different story. They're not bound by location, not bound by body. The phenomena transfers through attention, through awareness. Once seen, they linger. Another note, found scribbled inside a torn Bible. They are not 3. They are 1, mirrored in flesh. Let that sink in. The triplets were not simply siblings. They were a pattern, a manifestation, an echo of something that adapts, reappears, and tests the boundaries of our understanding. It didn't start in Cedar Mills, and it didn't end with their disappearance. And the institutions know. In 1962, a classified Pentagon report, later leaked during the church committee hearings, included a single redacted page referring to a tripartite consciousness anomaly encountered during early MK-Ultra experiments. Test subjects exposed to certain symbols, yes, those circles, reported feeling watched, manipulated, even unwoven from linear time. The project was shut down, or so they claimed, because to this day, sightings persist. A photo taken in 1999 by a backpacker in Ohio. 3 boys standing barefoot in a cornfield at sunset, smiling, but with no footprints in the dirt behind them. In 2008, a psychiatric patient in Oregon described recurring dreams of a voice made of 3 mouths, warning her that her unborn child wasn't just hers. And last year, yes, last year, a podcast host researching Cold War mind control vanished after publishing an episode titled The Cedar Mills Pattern, What They Tried to Erase. The episode was wiped, his channel gone, and the only trace left, 3 concentric circles drawn in dust on his apartment window. Are you starting to understand? You're not just listening to a story, you're participating in a phenomenon. By now, you may feel it. That tension behind your eyes, the chill crawling down your spine. That's not fear, that's recognition. Because the deeper you descend, the more you realize this isn't a tale of forgotten triplets in a dusty Ohio town. It's a map, and you're already standing on it. The reason institutions buried this story isn't because it was strange, it's because it worked. Whatever force manifested through the Cedar Mills triplets, whatever consciousness moved between their bodies and bled into the minds of those around them, it did something no government, no religion, no scientist could ever do. It proved the limits of human control. In 1974, deep inside the vaults of the Hoover Building, a redacted FBI report labeled Operation Hearthstone was reviewed under emergency classification. It detailed an unregistered psychological contagion centered on 3 children from Akron, Ohio. Children who had never met, never shared DNA, but spoke in identical voices, drew the same symbols, and claimed to dream each other's dreams. The directive was swift: separate, silence, observe, never allow proximity, never allow public documentation. Sound familiar? You're looking at the replication of an ancient pattern. Every few decades, sometimes sooner, it happens again. Always in 3s, always with language, memory, and something else bleeding through. A former NSA linguist who turned whistleblower in 1991 described it this way: "It's not speech, it's not thought. It's something older, using the human nervous system like a violin string. Wherever the triplet pattern appears, reality becomes pliable." And here's the part that should truly disturb you. In all these modern cases, none of the children lived past adolescence. They weren't just silenced, they were erased. Their birth records expunged, graves unmarked, parents institutionalized or suicided under mysterious circumstances. And every time the story vanished with them, until another case surfaced. Another pattern, another trio. But there's one thing the institutions can't control: awareness. And that's why this video matters. That's why you matter. Because if this pattern survives by hiding in plain sight, by staying just below the threshold of belief, then every view, every comment, every shared link becomes a crack in the wall they've spent centuries building. You were never supposed to hear this. You were never supposed to feel this. But here you are, still watching, still changing. And now it's time for the final descent. This is where the story stops being a story and becomes a warning. Because what you've learned is no mere curiosity. It's a blueprint for understanding a force older than any empire, any regime, any religion. A force that moves in threes, that transcends bodies, that watches from shadows and whispers through bloodlines. The triplets born in that hidden basement in 1856 Ohio were more than children. They were carriers, vessels of a consciousness the world was never ready to confront. And the institutions that tried to control them, they only delayed the inevitable. You see, containment breeds resistance. Silence feeds awareness. Every attempt to erase this knowledge only tightens its grip on reality. Look closely around you. The patterns are everywhere. In families, in history, in your own mind. The triplets were the first modern manifestation of something eternal, something terrifyingly human and inhuman at once. And now, it's awakening again. Because what the triplets proved is this: the human mind is not a cage, it's a gateway. You're standing at the threshold. What you choose next will define everything. Will you turn away? Pretend this was just a story, another strange secret better left buried? Or will you step through the veil and accept that the world you know is only a fraction of the whole? Because once this knowledge settles in your bones, once the triplets' legacy takes root inside you, nothing will ever be the same. Remember their mother's last words. They'll know things. They'll always know. Now, you know too. The silence watches. The silence watches. If you're ready to walk this path, to embrace what others fear, subscribe and join the circle of those who dare to see. Because the truth doesn't wait. It hunts. And now, it's hunting you.